Very relevant for your neck of the woods, because that means that incomes and jobs are only going to be under further pressure, which means rents are going to be under further pressure. And so what emerges from the CPI report, as well as the marketplace, is more of the traditional recession case that goes along with an energy shock. Higher energy prices, you set the Federal Reserve and mainstream economics aside. Common sense, if you raise energy prices for non-economic reasons, if the economy can't handle it, the response in the economy is to pull back. Everybody ends up pulling back, incomes pull back, unemployment goes up. And so what the CPI report essentially, and I don't want to say confirmed, but it certainly feels like it was moving in that direction, was the demand destruction that goes along with an energy shock case. And I think that's one reason why people were shocked by it, because they keep hearing how the economy is resilient, when you know from your business that that's not really the case. When we say the economy is not resilient, what that doesn't mean, it's falling off a cliff. It's not early 2009 all over again. It just means that regular people are struggling. They really can't afford higher gasoline prices, so they're cutting back in other areas. They're not pulling back. They're not, it's not an absolute crash or catastrophe, but it's enough at the margins that it shows up in the CPI report, and it makes business that much more difficult, because you're trying to struggle bringing in revenue when your customers are hurting. At the same time, you're hurting because your gas bill and your energy bill is going up. And so it just adds more and more pain. I think one of the things that the marketplace, or not really the marketplace, but one of the things that the commentary keeps looking for is the breaking point. When are we going to get to the breaking point where everything does fall off a cliff? And I'm not sure we're going to. I think it's, we've been in this situation for a couple of years where the pressure just keeps building and building and building. It makes people miserable, but it doesn't necessarily lead to something like a massive, full-blown contraction that just wows everybody's, knocks everybody's socks off. To me, the CPI was like, hey, we've got demand destruction, we've got more pressure on consumers and businesses, and it's not going to lead to inflation. It's going to lead to the opposite.
Because there's so much inventory, the renter has the upper hand. There's concessions in the market, occupancies are down. And so there's, I know in part of the CPI is that OER, the owners will let a rent, which is kind of a joke. But regardless, it is a piece, right? And so for sure, you're not seeing any rent growth in that CPI at the moment. Now that could change in time, but when we start to see a sway of people, great if the mortgage payment goes down, but what about the ownership piece? That's also going up. That's just pushing more people to the renter side of the equation, which is going to eventually push again. And it's going to, we're already seeing absorption pretty high. People are not buying like they were. They're not financing like they were. They're not moving around like they were. That's all true. And so people are electing to stay in apartments or rentals longer. That's not necessarily good. Obviously, even I have 2 kids. You've met them both. I want them to be able to, rent, save some cash, buy an affordable home. Those days are tough right now, extremely tough. That down payment is without out of reach for many, many people. So all that means is that more pressure is going to stay on the rental side of the equation for a while. And so that to me is what I look at. That's one more reason why we could head more into, a renter nation if we can't get that, not even talking about interest rates at the moment.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you here. Is that one of the reasons why you said, earlier on in the video here, you talked about you want to be looking for properties? Is that kind of a structural tailwind that you expect to carry forward, that eventually people who are not buying houses, or maybe even selling out of the house that they own and, they got to live somewhere, they start maybe renting? So you have, a structural shift out of single family housing and into multifamily, which you're right. From a macroeconomic or an over high level perspective, this is not a good. And we actually want the opposite. We want people owning homes because it makes them better people. They're happier. Yep. They're creating equity for themselves, which is usually the biggest asset. So for an actual healthy economy and society, we want people going the other direction. However, recognizing that, from an individual perspective, there's really not much you can do about it except, hate to say it because it sounds very cold, but to take advantage of what's taking place from somebody who's got investable funds, there's an opportunity here. So that's the question is this one of the things that you're looking at as a reason to begin looking in the property sector and say, look, as long as this continues, the pressure continues to build on especially households, they're not going to have much choice. They're not going to be able to afford a rent. I know the National Association of this is a statistic I throw around all the time. The NAR last year in their annual report said the median first-time homebuyer age was 40.
Yeah.
which means people are going to be renting for a long period of time. So is that something you're factoring in as you're looking for properties, so thinking that's a significant tailwind?
Yes. So there's a few things. The first thing is price and basis, right? You want to make sure that you have a tremendous amount of room there. So we have seen a repricing. Cap rates are
Which,
up.
which we said before, is in your favor, right? Because the
Correct.
market is repricing
That's
from
right.
a high to a low.
Yes.
So I can see where you're coming from. There's a lot of factors that they're not there yet, but they're starting to line up in just the right way.
Correct. That's right. Yeah. So first thing is price. Then of course is will we have a lot of pressure of our renters moving to single family, right? That's a big one because again, that's just, I'm not going to change history. That is what people do. They oftentimes rent and then save and then buy a home. And, during home building times, they prey on the apartment builders and the renters, and they say, why rent when you can buy? And that cycle will repeat itself at some point. But what we have, it's very different this cycle that was not in the GFC, is we had 4, 5, 6 million homes on the MLS, and we had a massive repricing of single family. So single family came down in price, which then started to compete with multi again, and then it just cycle repeated itself. And so,
yeah, that's one of the things about the current cycle. It looks bad, but prices have been relatively stable. So,
correct.
I mean, that's in your, so what you're saying is in order for the cycle or the structural change to shift again, you would need to see either home prices come way down
Yep.
to make it economical for renters to move back to owners, which that wouldn't be a good thing either.
Right. No, that's right.
But that's really kind of the only, either incomes really do have to rise precipitously in a sustained fashion, or home prices really have to come down. And neither of those things seem to be, at least imminent or maybe even likely.
Right. And then add that inflationary operating cost, to that as well. So you've got home prices that are relatively stable, and they're certainly not going to the spot where they were when you and I both went through the GFC. I personally went through that. So the home prices are still somewhere just bumping around 400, I think. And so even if rates come down from 7.6 to 5 to 4 or whatever, I still think you're going to have these affordability issues.
No question, because it's not, you're right. It's not just it's not even really the interest rate. It's a whole bunch of other factors. Is there any way to, or maybe you've already thought this through, how long a cycle it might be before you get to that? Or is that just, hey, look, this is a structural change that we can take advantage of and just ride it as long as we possibly can, and hope that these positive factors that are lining up for multifamily continue to line up, and they spit off these bargains every once in a while. You jump on them, make a lot of money there, and hope that they kind of proliferate.
I put things in baseball terms. And so I think that I always tell everybody we're in the first few innings right now where, you don't know where this is headed. We do think we're hedged on the single family piece, which we already discussed. We don't think we'll have any threat from there. The issue the market currently has is we have an oversupply or a hangover, very low interest rate, produced a tremendous amount of supply that hit a lot of it in 25. We had a 50-year high of supply in multifamily in 25. That's still working its way through